Good evening and welcome to Story Hour. I'm tonight's host, Laura Blackwell. My delightful co-host, Daniel Marcus, started Story Hour in April of 2020, is what I've been saying. Yes.
Sounds about right.
To help people stay connected in what was a pretty difficult time. And, times get better and times backslide a little, but I'm still really enjoying the sense of connection with everybody here. And so the two of us have been keeping this going, thanks to our regulars and thanks to our wonderful readers. So welcome back to those of you who are returning, and welcome to those of you joining us for the first time. As always, we have two writers reading for their favorite nonprofits. Tonight's readers are C.S.E Cooney and Carlos Hernandez. If you are fortunate enough to help others during this time, please consider a donation to one or both of tonight's featured nonprofits. C.S.E Cooney is reading for Upstart Creatures. Upstart Creatures is a diverse company of extraordinary artists that welcomes audiences to metaphysical feasts. Free for all, the events nurture and nourish a sense of community, feeding body and soul by combining theater with a mouth-watering menu prepared and served by the artists themselves. A guaranteed once-in-a-lifetime experience made possible by the generosity of donors and participating artists. You can learn more at upstartcreatures.com. Carlos Hernandez is reading for JDRF. JDRF's mission is to find a cure for type 1 diabetes, T1D, and its complications through the support of research. Every dollar directed to this critical research comes from donors like you. Your generosity makes real progress possible and propels us toward the goal of a world without T1D. You can learn more at jdrf.org. If you're here on Zoom, feel free to leave your camera on. It's really lovely for all of us to see humans without masks and know that that's healthy for all of us. Chime in on the text chat if you like. If you're joining us on Facebook, thank you. And we may not see your messages in real time, so please be good, okay? Thank you. So, which of you wants to read first?
Carlos does. I do.
Oh, Carlos, thanks for volunteering.
We had it all worked out in advance.
Yes, yes. Sorry, sometimes I forget to get that ironed out. Carlos Hernandez is the author of the award-winning Sal and Gabi Break the Universe and its sequel, Sal and Gabi Fix the Universe. Very responsible, Sal and Gabi. The short story collection, The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, and many stories and poems. Follow him on socials at Write, Teach, Play. Carlos, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, people on Zoom. Thank you, people on Facebook, for being here. Really
we
excited.
are all delighted that you're here.
Oh, it's just such a great community building sort of thing, and both Claire's story and mine very much have to do with community building and the ways in which communities can get messed up and the ways that the communities can be brought back together. And so we're gonna go on sort of like a cosine curve ride, and I'm part one of that ride, but Claire's gonna take you out on a very interesting kind of complicated upward motion there. But I just want to say my story is weird. Today we're going full on weird, and I hope you're ready for weirdness. We just saw The Green Knight, which was weird, and I said to Claire, you know what? I'm not sure if I liked it, but I really liked it. I really liked how strange and how many images came from it that I'd never seen before. And so, I think today I hope to impart to you a couple of things that maybe you haven't encountered in your imaginative journeys as of yet. The story today that I'm reading is called The Weeping Pear. And I just want to reemphasize, the JDRF is a phenomenal organization, and humongous strides have been made recently in type 1 diabetes management. Tremendous ones. There are little detectors that they can put in people's guts right now that allow them to monitor their blood system in a way that has never been possible, with an accuracy and a level of speed, of alacrity that hasn't existed before. So there are all sorts of phenomenal things that are happening for diabetic folks right now that we can continue to help with. So this is for them. I hope they like weird stories. This is called The Weeping Pear. With a moist, tearing sound, a sound not unlike the Caesarean birth of the universe, a fuzzy camel-colored pear, which sat perched at the top of a bowl of assorted fruits, peeled open its new eye. Now, the pear, as you know, is not a fruit normally known for having eyes. But this one was a beaut, an enormous eye, a mesmerizing eye, an eye that was lit from within, like opal surrounded by amber, inset into marble. There had been nothing extraordinary about the pear by the time Mabelinda the megromancer had gone to bed, tired after a good day's megramming, i.e. giving the local baron dizzy spells as punishment for his insistence on collecting taxes during a time of famine. She had gotten herself extremely worked up about the baron, and as she sat at the kitchen table casting her spell, i.e. whipping her finger around the edge of a bowl of potent wine, yelling and cursing his name, more than a little of that juicy red wine splashed out of the bowl. A single but sizable drop of that wine had landed on the pear, on the exact spot where now its brand new eye had sluiced open. The pear's eye now moved slowly around the room, discerning and differentiating shapes as best as it could in the blood-pudding darkness of the magic tower. As it had only come to life a moment ago, it had no words to describe the table, or the tablecloth stained red with wine, or the bowl with only a little wine left in it, or the image of a vomiting baron reflected in the puddle of wine still in the bowl. But the pair saw all these things, and with a cat's unschooled cunning, it understood them well enough. The pear hopped down from its perch atop the bowl of fruit, as well as a legless, fat-bottomed fruit can hope to hop. It hopped across the table, it hopped over to the bowl with the little wine remaining in it, and then into the bowl, causing the baron's face to ripple. And then it vanished altogether from Mabelinda the megromancer's magic tower entirely. Now, anyone who has retched will tell you that, as wretched as it is to retch, it is even more wretched to be surprised while one is in the middle of retching. Picture a wretched, retching baron. Well, he has a name, if it must be remembered. Baron Huladan Gañesos y Temblor. His barony sported the name La Isla de las Mariposas, the way someone might wear a hat that's too fancy for the rest of the outfit. It was a thoroughly landlocked barony, utterly devoid of islandness, and no butterflies had been spotted there since the onset of the famine nearly 3 years running. So it goes with names, I suppose. No pears had been spotted for nearly 3 years in the barony either. Yet now one appeared out of nowhere, exactly 2 meters above Baron Huladan's head. It then fell both of those meters, one after another, the way physics insists that's the way that meters fall, and if you don't believe me, I'd like to see you fall the second meter first and the first meter second. When the pear had fallen those 2 meters in the proper order, it rabbit-punched Baron Huladan on the back of the head, just as the Baron was beginning a new round of megrum-induced dry heaves into a chamber pot that was dangerously heavy with vomitus. The absolute worst time to be rabbit-punched, and really, is there ever a good time? Too vertiginous and poleaxed by this new and unexpected pain to even rise to his feet, Baron Huladan clutched the back of his head and cursed so foully that his servants feared entering his chamber to help him. Not that they would have helped him otherwise. They despised him and wished him dead every hour on the hour. In fact, the only reason the Baron was still alive was because his servants had lacked the courage to administer enough poison in his food to actually finish the job. Irony of ironies, the indecisive amount of poison with which they seasoned his meals had only succeeded in making him immune to poison. Indecision is no decision, as the saying I just made up goes. Baron Huladan, gasping and weeping from his right eye, sat up and threw himself hard against the wall of his chamber, his nightshirt breaking around him like a wave against a jutting rock. Thus propped up, he scanned the room for the villain who had rabbit-punched him on the back of the head. But there was no one. Nothing in the room seemed at all different. The massive oak doors remained shut tight, and the only key still hung on a thong around his neck. Everything was absolutely the same as it had been, positively just as it should be. Which was the most frightening thing of all? Was this the work of a ghost? Some avenging revenant seeking retribution? He started to gibberingly list the many hundreds, make that thousands, of dead people who had one or more motives for revenge against him. He could have spent days enumerating enemies, but just then his eye caught sight of something odd on the floor, not 3 meters away. It took some seconds to realize that it was an upright, brown-skinned pear, at the very peak of ripeness. Though Baron Huladan ate better than anyone else in Las Islas de las Mariposas, even he could not get fruit. There was simply none to be had in all the barony, save, of course, for the magical garden kept by Mebolinda the Megromancer. But that loathsome witch refused to share her fruit with him. Moreover, she had had the audacity to decimate his armies when he tried to overrun her tower. A note to all future barons: don't let your archers fire once a Megromancer has made them dizzy, or the friendly fire casualties will be morale-breakingly high. Baron Huladan had sworn then and there to exact vengeance upon her. Well, I was going to spare you the details, for they are as repugnant as the Baron who spoke them is. But, so that this is a complete history of events, this is how he specifically swore. He swore to hire the most powerful archmage on the continent to turn Mebolinda into a chamber pot, and that chamber pot he would joyously befoul every day of his life. Monster. He never succeeded in finding an archmage foolish enough to challenge Mebolinda, of course, since an archmage is by definition not an idiot. So he had been without any revenge, and worse, any fruit, lo these many years, like the commonest of Mariposan peasants. But now, here before him, a great globular pear, big as a bear cub, sat on the floor just a few meters away. Whence it had come? Was it a trick, illusion, a trap? Desire dispensed with his questions. Replacing them was an intense, irresistible hunger. Never had he wanted to bite into something so much in all his life. He scampered toward the pear, drooling and laughing, a beast on hands and knees. Scooping up the pear, he opened his mouth wide, intent on plunging as much of the pear into his craw as possible. That is, until the pear opened its eye. Baron Huladan screamed. He dropped the pear. On hands and knees, he scampered backwards. "Abomination!" he accused. "Monstrosity! Perversion of nature!" Those harsh words hurt the pear's feelings. It only wanted to be eaten, after all, so that the seeds and eyeballs inside it could be spread. A viscous tear fell from its eye. The Baron, redefining the limits of rage, got to his feet, walked over to the fireplace, and grabbed a poker, intent on pulpifying the pear. And then, he would make Mebolinda pay for this insult, for who else could have done this to him save her? But When he turned away from the fireplace, he discovered that the pear had hopped over to him. It now stood right between his stockinged feet, looking up at him with one eye. It was no longer crying. It looked angry. It was angry, so angry, in fact, that faster than a crossbow bolt, it launched itself off the floor and into the Baron's screaming mouth. When the servants found Baron Huladan's body, a scarecrow of angles now, and missing most its stuffing, there below the window of his private chambers, they left it there. It's true that they would have happily let him rot wherever he had happened to fall, but as per the baronet's instructions, they had tried to collect the corpse. The servants couldn't budge the body, however. By the time it was found, the roots that had sprung from its back gripped the earth with the strength of a giant's fist. And then a sapling appeared much too quickly out of the Baron's chest and grew so quickly that the human eye could detect its growing, its steady rise toward the heavens. And the servants moved away as far from the body as superstition dictated, and they simply watched the new tree grow. They weren't alone for long. Word spread. The citizens of La Isla de las Mariposas gathered around the sapling and observed it throughout the day as it grew into a modestly sized tree, and then an immodestly sized tree, and then a massive tree, a gargantuan tree, and then a tree so prodigious it placed the entire castle under its shadow. Once the night had fully replaced the day, the tree pushed fuzzy brown fruits out of its branches like balloons inflating. It was only seconds later when every branch hung heavy with pears. Thousands of them, each as big and taut as a suckling pig. "What does this mean?" asked Mabelinda, who was watching all this through a splash of wine in a bowl. Suddenly afraid, she looked up and noticed she was missing a pear. Meanwhile, a face emerged from the thickest part of the prodigious pear tree's trunk. It was the face of Baron Huladan. "My people," said the Baron in a voice corrugated with kindness, "my children, the famine is ended. Come and eat." Now, it took some convincing to get the Mariposans to disregard the frightening newness of all of this and start plucking pears. But really, not that much convincing was necessary. These people were starving, and the fruit looked so delicious. These were perfect pears, heavy with the stuff of life and without a blemish on them. It wasn't long before every Mariposan in attendance cradled a sandbag-heavy pear to their bosom, eager to devour it. Until, of course, each pear opened its one eye and stared back at each Mariposan staring at it. That, as you might expect, gave the Mariposans pause. As one, they turned to the face in the tree, awaiting an explanation. And how did the tree respond? It did its best imitation of a human shrug. "Do you know," the tree asked them, "why crows eat the eyes of carrion first, before they eat any other part?" The tree theatrically held the silence before it answered its own question. "Because crows are very smart." These were sensible people. They all knew crows were smart, and they all knew they ate the eyeballs first. The logic was airtight, plus they were starving. So they ate the eyes out of the pears first, and then all the rest of the pears down to the stems. Thus began an evening that would end with a feeling the Mariposans had almost forgotten could exist, it had been so long. The feeling of utter satiety. The famine is over, the Mariposans cheered. The Baron has become a saint. He will feed us. I will, said the Baron come tree. I will give you all the pears you want. As soon as you kill Mabelinda and bury her corpse here, so my roots may feast on her body for all eternity. La Isla de las Mariposas, whose name had never made any sense, got a new name, Paraboleda, a portmanteau meaning the pear grove. But the citizens of Paraboleda were still called Mariposans, which of course made no sense. Such is the way of names. Paraboleda's sole export, the one that made it immensely rich, was its unique weeping pear. It never rotted, for no matter how it traveled, it was the only fruit in existence that remained alive after it was plucked. It was the perfect food for commerce, therefore, and for surviving drought and famine. What was once strange quickly became a worldwide staple. A pear with an eye that was so very prone to weeping? Why not? Because the weeping pear became so widely available, i.e. cheap, it became associated with poverty. Of course, the rich quietly maintained huge silos of them in reserve, for famine might strike again, who knew? Some spoiled children demanded that their parents cut out the eye before they would eat the pear. But that is why spankings were invented, no? Sometimes the pears were kept as pets, the way of some chickens and pigs. But even those, sooner or later, ended up a meal, since that is what the pears desired most in life. And they found devious ways to introduce themselves into their host's bodies. Sometimes these sentient pears accidentally committed murder, trying to jam themselves down someone's gullet and accidentally choking them to death. But murder by weeping pear was rare. In fact, demographically speaking, the world became a little more survivable thanks to the fruit. Nourishment ceased to be quite as much of a worry as it once had been. And as for the migraines that eating a weeping pear inevitably induced, and the sickening dizziness that left a home carpeted with moaning bodies for 2 full hours after mealtime, and the feeling that the whole world is built upon a series of evils, like the ones done to Mabelinda, this evil so deep that we never come close to unearthing them all. Migraines pass, dizziness fades, and who has time to think about the evils of the past? The answer is no one. Not when they're starving. Thank you very much.
Well, that was delightful. It was very weird, but it was also delightful.
I told you weird was coming.
I'd still eat pears. More carefully.
Careful what you ask for there. If an eyeball opens in your pear, I suggest you throw it away. I as author do not recommend eating pears.
Don't eat eyeballs. I just don't eat eyeballs. The breath between stories. Thank you, Carlos. That was really delightful. Really, really fun. And not to be outdone, our next reader is C.S.E. Cooney. C.S.E. Cooney is the author of World Fantasy Award-winning Bone Swan stories. In 2022, her novel, Saint Death's Daughter, debuts with Solaris, as well as her collection Dark Breakers, all stories taking place in the world of Desdemona and the Deep, forthcoming from Mythic Delirium. Her short novel, The Twice Drowned Saint, appears in A Sinister Quartet, and her 2021 short work includes stories in Uncanny Magazine and Mermaids Monthly, both inspired by story prompts from Negocios Infernales, a tabletop roleplay RPG designed by Cooney and her husband, Carlos Hernandez. That sounds familiar. Forthcoming from Outland Entertainment. Find her online at csecooney.com, at C.S.E Cooney on Twitter and Instagram. Welcome, C.S.E Cooney.
Thank you so much, Laura. I wanted to also say that the story Carlos just read, The Weeping Pear, was also inspired by the cards from Negocios and Finales. There's a deck of 70 kind of tarot-like prophecy imagey cards, and we plan in the appendices of the rulebook to kind of invite people to use them as story prompts or to host what we call infernal salons, because where we give writers prompts and everybody has a timed writing session, and then there's a reading of anybody who wants to read what they wrote after it. They're super fun, and we've done a couple of them, and that's just another part of what we hope to plan, spreading the weirdness. And the Weeping Pear is definitely a part of that oeuvre. This one is called As for Peace, Call It Murder. And as we were reading these to each other earlier today, I was finding a lot of delightful links: crows, eyeballs, terrible people being in charge when they oughtn't to be. This came, I saw something called 5 Monologues from the Laws of Light. It was a project my friend Brian Shaw directed. And it was so beautiful, and it was about the poets, like, of the Stalinist era, some dead, some exiled, one who memorized all of her husband's work because she was afraid of committing it to paper, that it would be destroyed, and later was the sole repository after he died, and is the reason his work survived. So I've been thinking about poets. I was given a prompt for this collection called Sword and Sonnet, and we were to write about battle poets. That was our prompt, battle poets. And I thought about war and about poets, and this is what I came up with. As for peace, call it murder. Sing us your love songs now, the soldiers said to the poet Quattromani. She was in no position to sing anything ever again. They had sliced off half her tongue, then seared the wound shut. The others watched from the floor of the arena, huddled masses, etc. Teachers, artists, journalists, religious leaders of every stripe, collar, and headscarf, who, each in their day, had done equal amounts of good and damage. Union leaders, a few of the wrong sorts of politicians, a motley crowd of liberals, left hands hacked off to mark their leanings, and ethical conservatives. Anyone who'd opposed the new Supreme Commander's spectacular coup. Ordinary people, in other words, like Quattromani. Some of the prisoners had even read her poetry, though not all had liked it. Sing us your love songs now, the soldiers taunted her. And Quattromani, who had only her life left to lose, stood up. She was not very old, looked older, had never expected to live as long as she had, outgrowing the mute misery of her early years, surviving addiction, solitude, a life on the road exposed and exploited, hunched and frangible with cynicism. Had never expected to learn to love herself, or what lay beyond herself, to enjoy the unimaginable ambition, maturity. Nevertheless, there she was. I am of age, she thought. I have lived long enough. But looking at the soldiers with luminous tenderness, with the bitter taste of blackened meat at the back of her throat, she knew it would never be enough. Even before she drew the tin whistle from her rags, smiling with broken teeth, before she set the plastic mouthpiece to her crusted lips, the soldiers and teachers and painters and politicians who watched the wonder of her realization dawn beheld her last song on her face just before they heard it, before it pierced them, and they bowed their heads and prayed. The soldiers executed her the next day. They were the same soldiers who had cut out her tongue and taunted her, the same who had wept and prayed when she played on her whistle. But with enough smokes and six-packs after their shift, with a night of hard, sedated sleep between them and her song, their eyes were sufficiently dry for target practice the next morning. They took her to the usual place, the back wall of the arena, and shot her like they had the others. When Quattromani was still alive and touring, opening for bigger bands, playing bars, performing at house concerts and folk festivals, the song that later enshrined her in our memory wasn't her most popular. But after the soldiers executed her, a few people, the prisoners, the witnesses, recalled the original lyrics of that last melody. Or at least they took the time to invent new lyrics just as good, attributing them to her. Many ordinary people are also poets. The name of her song was The Reeling Wall. Anyway, that is how it came to be known after Quattromani's death, when the other prisoners took to singing it at their own fusillades. The soul is a song, and it ends like a song, when the last breath is drawn at the Perdon. Do you know why we call Quattromani the war ender? I will tell you. But first I should tell you about the warbirds. The warbirds were relics of 2 wars before. The tech that had gone into them was lost, along with all the bright minds of a once thriving international scientific community, committed to fostering the R&D of artificial intelligence. There used to be thousands of warbirds, many makes and models, spying for different factions. The Corvei Corps, so-called. Intelligence agents, spies of the sky. In time, these birds fell, and from their scraps and circuitry, new warbirds were built, and when those fell, new warbirds, like their fiery predecessor, the phoenix, arose from their parts, and so on and so forth. The warbirds today were feral, patchwork descendants of pure brand ancestors, and hardier for it, unhackable. They had learned, over the last century or so, how to repair and rebuild themselves. No, not learned, were programmed lovingly by the last of the drone crones, whom Quattromani had known, incidentally, when she was a child. The military, unable to access the troves of insight the warbirds had to offer, didn't see the use of them anymore, but there were too many to destroy economically. From time to time, a war memorabilia hobbyist would still track down a group of them and study their activities from a pop-up blind for days, avid as any ornithologist. But mostly the warbirds were left to their own devices, gossiping, watching, gathering, and storing information that nobody alive was able to decode. Wild warbirds spent much of their time scavenging for solar tiles, then hoarding them in out-of-the-way airy arrays. These solar nests were more like nursing homes than nurseries, places a weary warbird might alight to recharge its degrading batteries, meet with old friends, spread the good word, a favorite new tune, maybe pass on a pro tip or two, such as how to find in those rare situations when a warbird might need a human hand or tool, the right sort of person to lend it, and the precise coordinates of where such a person might be found. No one knows the limits of a warbird's individual intellect. What we do know is that, as a collective entity, they are something of an uncanny library. Adventurers, opportunists, music lovers, linguists. A sentient, if not precisely alive, bank of burgeoning memory on the wing. Along the barbed wire battlements ringing the old stadium, the warbirds folded down like gloomy origami and listened to the music. In the static silence of their busily shared thoughts, they compiled and collated everything they knew about the stadium, every tidbit and factoidal oddment, juicy as entrails, shiny as eyeballs. The smorgasbord of data was the invisible carcass they feasted upon. The stadium had stood for at least 2 centuries. It predated the coup and the last war, and the war before that. It predated the warbirds, so naturally it fascinated them. The stadium used to host an international tennis open and a flurry of summer music festivals. When there were no more tournaments or festivals, it fell to ruins. Later, when there were tennis and concerts again, there had been some jibber-jabber about turning the stadium into a park or a cultural center, but national stability didn't last long enough to see any of those projects funded to fruition. After the coup, the Supreme Commander repurposed the ruins for an internment camp. The night the warbirds came was the same night the soldiers deposited Quattromani into the stadium's maw. This was no coincidence. Having known Quattromani since she was a filthy scrap kid, barely a tune in her, The Warbirds had followed her musical career with proprietary interest. Over the course of her life, they had sought her out to solicit her aid more than once. She always gave it. They regarded her as a friend, perhaps even an honorary member of their raggle-taggle Corps of AI Corps. But the soldiers they saw as magicians with only one act. The soldiers could disappear just about anyone. And now they had Quattromani. The Warbirds waited outside the stadium that night, and the night after, and for many nights. They watched and listened. They heard Quattromani play her tin whistle the evening before her execution. They knew the tune already. They remembered everything. Even after Quattromani died, the Warbirds lingered on their thorny metal perches, unruffled as gargoyles. The soldiers, always superstitious, started taking pot shots at them, but the shots were nothing the Warbirds couldn't easily deflect. It was not a matter of bullets, but of aim. The Warbirds had a few suggestions on that frontier. Aim 3 inches to the left had always been a popular projection, or isn't that cloud distracting, or there's something in your eye, pal. The original programmer mechanics had designed their Warbirds to be passive collectors of information, not destructive devices. But they had fitted out the flying forces of the Corps of AI Corps with a few personal security measures aimed at increasing their chances of survival in the field. Mostly these were in the area of deflection, distraction, and distortion, i.e., the ability, a very small one, to project a low-grade telepathic suggestion into the minds of potential adversaries. It was also how the Warbirds communicated with their drone crones during a live drop, transmitting brief surges of coded info dumps mind to mind until they'd gotten their point across. Like I said, after Quattromani's execution, the prisoners filled that old stadium with music again. A cappella. Untrained. Always the reeling wall. Though, as the months wore on, those that remained got through fewer and fewer verses. Then only the refrain, followed by a staccato burst of bullets. From their sentinel stances, the Warbirds recorded everything. More Warbirds came to listen, the glow of their cameras winking like acid stars. They were, in a word, earwormed. That was in the summer. By autumn, the stadium finally fell quiet. Finally, the Warbirds took wing. They rose like dark spores off the squat and rotting fruit of the stadium, scattered skyward in all directions, eerie on the wind above suburbs, cities, countryside, or perched on branches, windowsills, depot roofs, storefront awnings, or pacing the tops of tanks, the training fields outside the barracks, the satellite dishes, crowning the Supreme Commander's palace. The Warbirds passed along their song. They did not sing, exactly, but all their thought was music. Quattromani's music. And music was what the Warbirds thoughtfully suggested. Inexorably, persuasively, day and night, without succor, without surcease. The Warbirds spread the reeling wall from one end of the country to the other, an epidemic of auditory illusion worse than tinnitus, a high, whistling, wild thing that lanced the brain like a darning needle and left the taste of burnt meat and blood on the tongue. Citizens, soldiers, corporate lawyers, farmers, white-collar workers, blue-collar workers, artisans, artists, everyone heard the song equally. No one was spared. For days, the Supreme Commander could not leave his bed. How he rocked and blubbered, pleaded, stormed. He lit candles and tipped the hot wax into his ears so that he would not hear the song anymore. But it was not his ears that heard it. And the Warbirds never stopped remembering. Not for an instant. Never let him stop remembering. Never let us stop remembering their song and the shadeless summer of Quattromani's music and the salvo that never failed to follow. Had the song stuttered for even just one damned hour, a quarter of an hour, a handful of minutes, I'm sure the soldiers would have directed their counter-air defense missiles into the ether and blown every last spy drone of the old Corps of AI Corps right out of the sky. But they could not move for Weeping. Instead, like their supreme commander, they clutched their heads. They laid down their arms. They wept. They wept like they had wept the first time they heard Quattromani's song, the night before they executed her. Only this time, they could not stop. That, by the way, is why we call her the War Ender. But before any of this happened, long before, there was the Mudflats, a child, and a broken crow. I want you to remember them. It's important to know where things come from. Imagine a warbird, cracked almost in two, dented, bent, limp, battered, ragged wings, alas. It is helpless and aware of its helplessness, though hardly what you'd call alive. The child squats, pokes. She's a scrap kid, and the metal man's always looking for some shard ware to repurpose. If she brings him back a whole warbird, he might just let her select from his bucket of glass candy. Her favorites are those twists that taste clean and green and keep her up 3-4 nights running, her thoughts as fast as code, the wind rhyming high above her. Cleaved and flightless it may be, but the warbird is far from stupid. It can still suggest. Come closer, kiddo, have I got a suggestion for you? The child hears a single word. Help. The plea is so wraith-like and weak it might be coming from her own belly, whose complaints she had learned over time to ignore. She can ignore this too. Sore and swollen she may be, but she is also stubborn, or she would not have lived this long. She has not lived so very long. She is not open to persuasion, not from this wretched piece of scrap with pallid eyes. Help. The child has never been asked to choose between serving herself and serving something else. The first is hard enough. She has already failed her own body and its needs. She has caved to its gluttonies instead and been eaten alive by them. She knows nothing of mercy. No one has ever shown her any. Nevertheless, she lifts the warbird into her arms and strikes out, not for the metal man after all, but for the last drone crone in the world. The drone crone, hands stuffed in the pockets of her coveralls, watches the burdened child approach the hut. The hut is scaled in solar paneling to give the equipment within their necessary boost, but on dark days, the elastomeric dynamo wheels can also generate a charge so long as the hut's rolling. The drone crone has drawn the metal shutters closed against a brittle wind, but these may as well be lace for all their rustwork of holes. Through one of the sizable eyelets, she can see the child clearly, the hard stamp of suffering on her face, her resignation, how the weight of the warbird she carries bends and bows her. The drone crone knows a warbird is mostly air and wingspan. The child, she thinks, is weak. Anemic? Malnourished? Yes, these. And by the cuts at the sides of her mouth, a glass eater too. Lost cause, then. The drone crone sniffs, dismisses her vestigial concern for the stick-like straw girl that some withered lizard corner of her brain keeps trying to reignite. She doesn't have time for humans. She's the last of the old Corvée Corps programmer mechanics, those meteorologists of intelligence currents who keep intelligence current. Unemployed a while now, years, her superior officers, her colleagues, her kith, kin, country, all dead and gone, but she loves her work, lives for it. She rebuilds warbirds out of the corpses of fallen warbirds, teaches them, tinkers with them, tweaks their programming, treats them like friends, pays no mind to the clankers and scrap kids who scavenge in her hut's wake for chips or wires or lenses that have outlived all their lives of usefulness, bringing them as barter for the metal man for a suck of his sweet glass candy. Those scrap kids, indecent appetites, they'll bargain for a twist, but settle for a snort, glass dust being better, they figure, than nothing. Better certainly than a package of cheese snot foraged from an ancient MRE, about as fine a meal as the little bastards will ever know, if only they knew, but calories are none of their concern. Here's, however, a scrap kid scratching at her door. Stunted, bloat-bellied, barely larger than the bird she cradles. Big eyes, green as glass candy. Ropey hair, crawling with vermin. skin as black as a warbird's wings. The drone crone glances again at the scrap kid's stony old face. That forgotten feeling stirs again, call it pity. Again she ignores it, gently lifts the warbird out of the kid's arms with hands as large and gnarled as the roots of a swamp oak, sets it on her charging table. Immediately the dim eyes brighten to pale, cunning coals. Otherwise the warbird does not move. She gets right to work, solders the cracked shell, patches the wing membranes, hammers out the worst dents, polishes that blunt beak clean of unspeakable effluvia. As she works, she clears her throat. Once, twice, begins to talk. Her voice, like her hair, her mouth, her patience, the functional parts of her liver, is tripwire thin. Did right to bring her here, scrapper. Thought she was downed for good. Wanton harriers, those goddamn GTMs. Hey, you're shaking. Not much to you, is there? The child blinks at the question, inquires urgently, Candy? The drone crone shakes her head, muttering about rat poison and caffeine and psychotropic corn syrup, and tosses the child a handful of food chews. Eat 'em, she advises. They expand in the gut like sawdust. Sit there for days, make you all warm and sodden. Nourishing, too. She laughs, though they taste like armpit. Name? She asks suddenly. Like to know what I'm feeding. The child mumbles something. Eh? She says her name louder, sullenly. Well, Quattramani, let's see what you saved today. From a canvas pouch on her tactical belt, the drone crone takes a flight controller. The warbird bucks awkwardly, turning on the table like the hands of a clock gone wrong. Rights itself, flaps to the drone crone's shoulder, cocks its scabrous head. Yes, welcome back. I see you're about bursting with news. The drone crone's head cocks just like the warbird. She looks at the child. Oh, you want to reward her, do you? Won't do any good. She's fiending for the one thing only. There's no great end for her. Candy? Asks Quattromoni again, more hopefully, this time of the warbird. The warbird vaults from the drone crone's shoulder to one of the shelves that line the metal hut. It sorts through a heap of tattered shine. Washers, coins, charms on broken chains, gold teeth, and pecks up a long, thin tin cylinder. Hardly a gleam on it. On one end, a scratched plastic mouthpiece. Along the body, 6 holes. Wants you to have it, the drone crone translates, handing it down. You yourself mind, not the metal man. Quattramani takes the object, inspects it dubiously. What is? The warbird bright-eyes her with its twin cameras, a twinkling look, almost. It descends back down to the table, paces back and forth, and as it paces, it looses into the child's mind such a melody as she has never heard before, except perhaps in the high rhyme of wind through wires, when she's riding the glass, flying fast, and nothing can touch her. The child puts the tin whistle to her lips. Thank you.
Well, that one was also very weird, but this one broke my heart.
Well, I thought we'd end on an up note. But I don't know, Carlos. Maybe we should have started with me and ended with you.
But you know,
that's jokes or something.
That's part of the beauty of the stories, the fact that we have these, you know, these beautiful self-contained stories, so that even if it's a sad story or a terrifying one, we can all go and sleep afterwards. You know, it's not the same as when someone reads you a terrifying chapter and you don't know what happens.
You get the full package.
Right.
It's good. The sad ones are good too.
But you know, she is the war ender. You know, it's like there is There is, it's a backward told story, I think, partially so that we don't dwell too much on the horror or dwell only on the horror and on the horror. I really love that the structure of the story is here are atrocities, but she is the war ender, and the climax comes in the middle. And what we get then is the origin story of her putting the whistle to her lips that
Mhm.
eventually will end the war.
And really, the warbirds are more the protagonists. You think it's Quattromani, but the warbirds are the cutie
Mhm.
pies, the cutie little bird
Cutie
drones.
magpies, yeah, but I don't know. See, here we are just talking about your story like to me, it's like it's definitely like I read it allegorically as sort of the warbirds being sort of like the muse, in the clouds, that comes down and inspires us, and the circle of art that happens when you don't know how important art is or what afterlife it will have beyond you.
Who's the poet that Stalin was like, leave him
Pushkin.
alone? Was Pushkin?
Yeah, the cloud and trousers. That's what you're
Yeah,
gonna say.
leave that cloud in trousers alone. He would like he put everybody else in concentration camps, and that cloud in trousers he left alone.
Wow. Even
So
Stalin
strange.
got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strange to think of Stalin being capable of such a beautiful metaphor, that
Mhm.
cloud and trousers.
Although I don't know if that's just the monologues from the Laws of Light. How much is history and how much is the playwright, Which is what we get. We get the beauty of the words later through art. Anyway,
A
thank
lot
you
of us
so
learn our
much for
history from
listening.
playwrights. Thank you both so much. This has just been transporting, and I've loved every minute. I could listen to you two read all night, but it's story hour. This is the format is going to confuse people, so
Yeah, it's
I
branding.
have to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you
Everyone,
so much for inviting us.
thank you so much for reading for us again. This was wonderful. Next week, we have another great one. We have John C. Foster and Ellen Denham. And you can keep up to date about the many, many story hours we have scheduled partway through December already at storyhour2020.com. And you can go and watch any story hours you've missed, watch this one a few more times, all of the above on the Story Hour page on Facebook, where you seem to have some fandom chatting right now. They seem to be having a lot of fun. So thank you so much, C.S.E Cooney, Carlos Hernandez. This has been really wonderful evening.
We are so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having us and for listening to our weird stories for an hour.
Thank you for
I
hosting.
really want to hang out in your background there, Carlos.
Right?
This is the background it's the back cover of Sal and Gabby Break the Universe, and I just love it so much. I use it for teaching, just because
Oh,
I
nice.
think it brings a sense of like peace and fun to the class.
That's fun. Well, Daniel, thank you for giving us a story hour in the first place. All of you who've joined us, thank you very much.
Yes,
And good
thank you,
night.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Story hour.
See you next week.